Expect the best, but be prepared for the worst. The CIA. Optimism is good, but excess of anything is bad. Any kind of optimism that creates a false sense of control can cloud our minds and lead us to miscalculate risks and make unsound decisions. Sometimes, excessive optimism can make people overestimate the possibility of getting to experience the good things while simultaneously avoiding the bad things. Psychologists call this the optimism bias, the inclination to overestimate the likelihood of encountering positive events in the future and to underestimate the likelihood of experiencing negative events.
Of all the behavioural biases that people are prone to, one of the most prevalent is optimism bias. We typically assume that things are going to turn out better than they do, and we overestimate the control that we as individuals have over events.
A combination of optimism bias and overconfidence effect makes most people overestimate their prospect of professional achievement. They expect themselves to be more successful than their peers. They miscalculate their lifespans to be longer than other people, expect themselves to be healthier than the average person. They think that their children are extraordinarily gifted, and they also hugely overestimate their likelihood of facing a divorce, unemployment, bankruptcy, or a deadly disease. Most people are overconfident that their future lives will be better than their parents who are to put up with.
Optimism bias reduces our capacity to consider the worst case scenarios, and this massively damages our capacity to make wise decisions. So here's what I always say to people as a way of countering the optimism bias. When you're facing a decision, think to yourself, what's the worst that can happen? And keep on asking that. What's the worst that can happen? And then you give an answer. You say, well, and then what might happen? And then what might happen? And only when you've really explored in all its gory gruesomeness the worst case scenarios that a decision might lead you to, and that you can evaluate, well, am I willing to live with those scenarios? If I make this decision and the worst happens, is it really that bad? And if you think you can live with the worst case scenarios, then you can go ahead and make the decision a little more confidently that it's a wise decision, because you've managed to move around the inherent optimism bias in our culture.
A major side effect of the optimism bias is that we begin to think that we have more control of the outcomes of events than we already have. We underestimate the likelihood of crisis that can turn our life upside down. This does not mean that all crises I'm talking about is bad. There are good crises and bad crises, depending on the nature in which they impact us. A good crisis is often a blessing in disguise, whereas the bad crisis is a warning sign before a disaster strikes.
Good crisis versus bad crisis. A good crisis is a challenge and an opportunity to uncover what we value, to rediscover what we need, and redefine what gives us pleasure in order to recreate a meaningful life and reconfigure inner workings of yourself.
A good crisis has the power to awaken our qualities, our hidden qualities and talents that were previously unknown to us. When some crisis strikes us, we are able to tap into the reservoir of courage that we have never felt before. We are able to take bold steps, bold decisions when a situation demands us to act. Crisis also unfolds possibilities out of unfavorable circumstances that can help us reinvent our lives. It gives us the courage to let go of the things that we are trying to hold on. Some crisis can transform us. It can help us shred our old skin, our old self, and give way to the new self. Crisis forces us to break down the barriers and entertain new possibilities that push us beyond our comfort zone. Crisis pushes us to the growth zone. A crisis can shake up the status quo, spurring us to reevaluate the people and situations in our lives and makes the corrections that lead to joy and success in our lives.
There's a famous saying, never waste a good crisis, and I think that's very important. If you are in a crisis situation, you need to think about how to turn that to your advantage. And candidly, if you're not in a crisis situation, sometimes the best way to get change done is to create a crisis and then use that to your advantage.
Crisis not only helps us evolve into becoming a better person, but it also makes us wonder who we are and gives us utmost clarity on where we want to go. In other words, crisis is our way of evolving when we lack the courage to do so on our own volition. When an animal is wounded, it gets more aggressive. Likewise, when we face a crisis, we are driven to climb higher above the pile of our past experiences into the newer, stronger, more brilliant, joyful, and wonderful selves which we are meant to be. But some crises are losses that can never be replaced. Some of these losses are predictable and are the organic accumulations of growth. At other times, our life as we know it is snatched from us with the death of a spouse, a crime against us, or a loss of our health or livelihood. Crisis can turn really bad, too. It can be chaotic, mentally and emotionally draining, uncertain, stressful, and quite traumatic in nature. Sometimes it's just a downward spiral that sticks us to a disaster or a tragedy.
Whatever may be the nature of the crisis we face, we are not completely powerless in the face of any crisis. We can handle even the worst of challenges in the worst of crises. Humans have been thriving on crisis for centuries. Many of the recorded progress in human history is all about how we overcame crisis after crisis. No crisis is wasted. Remember, nothing is permanent, pervasive, or personal. Even when you are confronted with an illness, loss, or something that you think will define you always, you will still definitely get an opportunity to change your focus and you learn to manage the crisis.
Be prepared for the worst. Crisis can be overwhelming for the unprepared minds that have never spent time thinking about negative possibilities, which can lead to a negative outcome. Have you ever imagined scenarios where you can lose everything? Now, this is not anxiety, but looking at negative possibilities that can derail your plans for a positive future. Ask yourself what you'd do if you lose your job today or your means of earnings. What step would you take if something bad ever happens with you, to your health, or to your loved ones? By mentally planning for the worst in advance, you'll be able to take out the scary parts of your life. You'll also learn to come up with proactive solutions that can bring positive changes. The answer may even be the key to your future happiness.
Hope for the best, but be prepared for the worst. Most of us are optimistic about our future success, but few are prepared to handle the future failures. One of the ways you can achieve the outcome of being prepared for the worst is to plan how you can handle your future failures. Now, positive thinking is good, but if it is not grounded in reality, it can be called mere wishful thinking. When you are prepared to handle different outcomes, you're well equipped to face different roadblocks and momentary failures and rejections. The preparation should not be only about how you plan to win, but also about how you can handle negative outcomes and failures.
How do you endure a loss, a shipwreck, a deserted island, an earthquake, or being lost in the wild? The way you handle those imaginary scenarios helps your mind to prepare for different types of scenarios that can play out in your life. Preparedness is defined as a state of readiness, and this is something we do in order to reach our goal. Preparedness is a part of resilience. Stoics understood that everything in life is temporary. You can be in a relationship today and be single tomorrow. You can drive an expensive car and live in a mansion today and rent a small room and use your feet as a means of transportation a year from now. You can be perfectly healthy now and bedridden next week. No situation in life is permanent. That's why sometimes it's too early to celebrate and too early to mourn over anything. Imagine the worst-case scenario.
I know this may sound a little strange. One of the best and healthiest things you can do is to actually do a scenario of the worst case and then imagine you getting through that and could you handle it. because the worst case scenario is likely to be banging around subliminally anyway. And what you need to do is to relieve that pressure, and the way out is through. So the best thing to do is to sit down, figure out what could the worst case be. Can I and could we tolerate that? That will relieve a bunch of pressure and give you much more freedom to focus on wild success. Obviously, you don't want to be dwelling on the negative picture. You don't want to sit there and be fatalistic or dwell in some sort of negative picture building. But you do want to go through that and take a look. That allows you a lot more freedom to then focus effectively and productively as you kind of shoot down the middle. So prepare for the worst, or at least be ready for it if in case it happens, and imagine the best and shoot down the middle.
Imagining the worst case scenario each time you're faced with difficulties isn't exactly a pleasant strategy. However, if done occasionally, it can prove to be a powerful exercise to gain better control over your emotions. The goal should be to visualize the worst thing that might happen, but instead of doing it out of fear or pessimism, you should start doing it to plan for the future or as a reminder that what you have today might disappear tomorrow. Thinking about losing your job and imagining how bad it would be allows you to prepare for the unexpected while you're still in a secure position. What specifically would you have done if you had lost your job? How much time would you take to find a new source of income if they fired you today? What actions could you immediately take to bounce back as quickly as possible?
You know, when the pandemic first hit, that very much affected our business and our income. So I had to sit down and I just pulled up an Excel spreadsheet and ran the numbers for the next year or so. Could we tolerate it? Could we manage it? Yes, we could. Now, ideally, we don't have to or won't have to do that, but it allowed me the freedom to then not have that lurking in the background as some sort of a concern. In a funny way, you know, could I handle the worst case if I can't get to my barber for another month? You know, worst case might be I'll look like I did in Berkeley in 1970. Or maybe the worst case, I'll be attacked by my wife with her dog shearing tools while I'm asleep and wake up with something, you know, a little shorter than it is. Anyway, do the worst case scenario, get through it, relax, and focus on the best.
Even the worst circumstances can be temporary, as long as you maintain a tight grip on what you can control, your thoughts and actions. Embrace Plan B.
Plan A need not be the best solution always. Now, Murphy's Law says whatever can go wrong will go wrong. Of all the things that can go wrong, the worst possible thing will go wrong at the worst possible time and cost you the most amount of money. You can't put all the eggs in one basket, you see. If a plan A fails, then you need plan B. If plan B fails, then you need C, and so on. Sometimes plan B can come out to be even more effective than plan A.
When Steven Spielberg's mechanical shark malfunctioned on the set of Jaws, he used music as a stand-in, creating a lurking underwater menace that was even more terrifying than the shark we could see then.
You know, sometimes our plans fail, and later we realize that it was all for good. Having more alternatives helps us negotiate better with life, especially in adverse conditions. Therefore, more backup plans are always good, especially when things don't go according to your first few plans. This does not mean that you move away from your end objective. It only means that you will find newer ways, better ways to meet your objectives. You are not moving away from your end goal. You are only finding new ways to achieve your goals. Remember, plan B is always a means to an outcome. It's not an alternative to an outcome.
Remember, Plan B is always a means to an outcome. It is not an alternative to your outcome. Make yourself uncomfortable. Consider these quotes. A ship is safe in the harbor, but that is not what it's made for. A smooth sea never made a skilled sailor. Only dead fish swim with the flow of the river. Comfort is the enemy of achievement.
One way to move forward in your evolution is to throw all the dice. Just go nuts and just say, boom, I got to grow up, and then gamble. That's one way. It's really uncomfortable. That's a really fast way to do it, and that's a way that's like sink or swim. I do that sometimes. Or the only other way that you can do it, and this requires a lot of self-motivation. This requires that you are personally motivated enough to stick with it, is to create very lofty goals for yourself. A goal that is uncomfortable will cause you to evolve in order to reach it. You're going to have to do things, you're going to have to participate in things, you're going to have to give things up in order to reach that goal. So it's only one of two things. The bottom line is you've got to become uncomfortable. You need challenge. But that challenge comes in the form of throwing yourself off a cliff and then learning how to fly on the way down, or pointing to the stars and aiming to reach that shit, and hopefully you land on the moon.
You need to get uncomfortable with your comfort zones and routines in order for you to grow. Try things that you never tried before, like the food. Try something new. Fashion, wear something different. Music or genre of cinema to begin with. Order something you never tried before in a restaurant. Say hello to a stranger in an elevator, and respond to people and situations a bit differently from that you're used to. Take a different approach. Research has shown that the brain craves novelty, and doing things that don't feel automatic have a positive effect on neurological activity. It can keep you sharp and make you more creative as well. When you voluntarily break down a pattern, what probably happens as an unpleasant surprise can have a lesser impact on you because you have trained yourself to embrace changes.
Most of our crises can be solved through the right problem-solving methods. Great achievers are also great problem solvers. The career or job you're holding currently has disguised itself as a problem solver. Every professional calls themselves a solution provider. No disappointment, setback, trauma, or tragedy becomes so devastating that you cannot glean something of value to take with yourself to the next experience. Successful people learn from everything that happens to them. They become victorious in situations where others see themselves helpless, like victims. Possibility thinking. Possibility thinking is a manner and nature in which you think in terms of possibilities and opportunities, rather than as difficulties, dead ends, or problems.
I'll give you an example. I knew a guy named Theo, and it seemed like Theo was always running uphill, so to speak. Things were always a battle for him, yet he was always quick to tell you why something wouldn't work. He was always looking for opportunities, yet when someone gave him an idea, he would shoot it down by asking, well, what if it doesn't work? And proceed to find all the reasons that it wouldn't work and how the idea wasn't right for him. I'm sure you know someone just like that. And unfortunately, their world is limited by the size of their thoughts. On the other hand, when a possibility thinker hears an idea or someone gives them some advice, they ask themselves, well, what if it does work? Or how can I apply that idea so it fits for me? They're simply thinking about what's possible rather than what isn't. A possibility thinker has more opportunities, more experiences, and of course lives in a world that has fewer limits. Remember, most of our personal limits are self-imposed by our own thoughts. So if you're looking to expand your opportunities, increase your income, or improve your relationships, make a conscious effort today to utilize possibility thinking. Because what's possible for you is beyond what you're doing right now.
People who are possibility thinkers are capable of accomplishing tasks that seem impossible because they believe in solutions. When you believe that you can do something difficult and then you succeed at it, many doors will open for you. When George Lucas succeeded in making Star Wars, despite those who said that his special effects hadn't ever been done and couldn't be done, many other possibilities opened up to him. Industrial Light and Magic, the company he created to produce those impossible special effects, became a source of revenue to help him underwrite his project and other projects. So no matter what you do, I don't care what you do, possibility thinking can help you broaden your horizons and dream bigger dreams.
Possibility thinking emerges from asset-based thinking. Once you acknowledge the resources you have, you can actually take notice of the possibilities that were previously unnoticed. It stems from a deep faith that there is a solution to every problem.
Radical creativity means that you think outside of the box. And so, for example, instead of saying, well, I've lost my job, this is terrible, the economy's bad, I'm not going to get another one, and then declining into your box, into your rut, and feeling depressed, you start to say to yourself, okay, I can't do perhaps what I've always done before, but what is it that I find most interesting now? What am I most curious about? And then you say to yourself, well, I've always been curious about geology, or I've always been curious about photography. And as much as it may not make sense to you at the moment, you go and you participate in something that you've always been curious about. Maybe you get an internship somewhere, or you volunteer somewhere, and that leads you to a new job. It means you approach things from a different point of view.
Possibility thinking accesses your imaginative mind instead of a stressed mind. A stressed mind is overwhelmed and often shut away from the possibility of finding a solution. When you're stressed, you literally go into a state of blindness like scotoma, which means blind spot. You feel like you're at the dead end where nothing seems like a solution. Problems look like an endless loop, but possibility thinkers turn problem into a challenge. Challenge is something conquerable and solvable to a human mind. The mere reframing of a problem from a problem to a challenge perspective opens up several possibilities. Moreover, we become more mindful to take notice of all the resources available to us, including seeking help when we need it the most.
Remember, we can manage situations like crisis using the right frame of mind. Very often, the crises are not real. They could be mere projections of the mind like fearful thoughts, anxiety, or worry. When you take control of your state of mind and think like a solution provider and an advisor, you gain perspectives to handle most of life's challenges. This means that resilience lies in having a different perspective to see things differently and act accordingly.